Ooh, Richard, can you still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Specifically in the area of infertility. And again, I'm a first-year DPhil student studying primary healthcare. If you have any questions as I go along, please put them into the Slido, and I have some opportunities for polls and other things like that as well. So just quickly to introduce myself. So I have a background in patient advocacy, software development, and health systems research. I should have actually gone even farther back, knowing that many of you guys are just starting to think about university or in the process of applying to university, because I actually started even further behind this. I started off working on ambulances when I was 18 and getting my certification in emergency healthcare. And I loved that a lot. But I felt often in the States like I was a little bit of a Band-Aid. There were lots of patients that we saw over and over again who just couldn't afford services, couldn't afford basic care. And I started to think a little bit about what I wanted to do to help with that and whether I could make some impact on kind of a little bit of a bigger scale than what I was making at the time. And I hadn't really considered traditional university. I was taking this sort of alternative path. And I ended up at Oxford. So I just wanted to point that out to say that, you know, there's lots of alternate paths that you can take. Part of it is kind of chasing what you enjoy. But yeah, it's worth keeping an open mind and yeah, chasing a little bit of what makes you interesting, what interests you. Anyway, and what interests me is digital health, patient empowerment, and women's healthcare specifically. And I'll dive in a little bit more about that in a minute. But my big goal overall is to improve the quality of different digital health tools that are available to patients today. So I'm going to start off here with a poll. So I'll hand it over to Richard so he can share the slideshow. But I'm wondering how many of you use your phone to get information about or to manage your health? And if you do, how frequently do you? Get any responses in, Richard? Aha, so far so good. Wow, 50% most of the time. Interesting. 33% some of the time, 17% all of the time. Okay, so far no one said never. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again real quick. So that is super interesting to know. So then you're all connoisseurs already of digital health. You're already way ahead of where I am. So digital health, this is a fancy definition, but it's just basically technology that uses different computing, connectivity, software, sensors for healthcare related uses. So in real time, this could be an app on your smartphone. This could be an Apple Watch, a Fitbit, a high-tech Bluetooth blood pressure cuff. It can mean many, many things, which I'll kind of discuss a little bit more in just a minute. So having given that example, what around you do you think of when I say digital health? When I say digital health, what in your life are you imagining? What comes to mind? We've established your phones, but anything more specific? Maybe an app on your phone or a specific wearable or something you have around your house?
Just to clarify, I've set off that word cloud now. So if you can enter on the second poll or that third poll, I think it's up there. What examples come to mind when you think of digital health? Yeah, I think you've got 35 characters. You can squeeze a couple of words in there. Oh, yeah, great. I'll share that, Kate, so you can see that.
Thank you. Here we go, the NHS app. Nice. Samsung Health. NHS website, fabulous. Bias, ooh, we got some exciting ones up in here. Apple Watches, Fitbit, Flow, Data. This is fabulous. We still got another person typing as well. So lots of apps, lots of kind of phone-related things. Well-being, great addition. Screens, yep, screen time. It's a big conversation right now. Oh, this is fabulous. Excellent responses. Good. So we've chatted a little bit about digital health. Sounds like you guys have a pretty good idea of what makes up digital health and already some of the kind of debates around it. So my kind of little area that I'm particularly interested in under digital health, so if we got that big digital health umbrella, is an area called femtech. So digital health, as we talked about, constitutes lots of different things. It's everything from apps like the NHS app, wearables like those Fitbits and Apple Watches that we were talking about, telehealth, so talking to your doctor on your computer or your phone, electronic health records, which are those things when you go to the doctor and they're typing on a computer and talking to you, they're probably updating your electronic health record. And femtech specifically kind of falls under this. It's a group of technologies that is targeted towards women specifically. So software, diagnostics, product services, lots of different things. But the main thing is that they cater to and support women's health at their center. And some examples of this are things like Flow, which somebody mentioned. So digital tools that can help you track your period, contraception, fertility, pregnancy, lots of different things, all related to women's health. It's also a growing segment of digital health in general. So for a long time, venture capital firms, which are the groups that fund a lot of startups and things like that, were traditionally underinvesting in women's health opportunities. Women's healthcare in general has been quite underinvested historically. And so now we're sort of catching up. So there's a big global femtech market. By 2030, it's predicted to be worth $103 billion. So lots of money is pouring into this area. And there's a couple of different critiques about that term, and I just want to talk about that real quick and acknowledge it, because I use it in here as kind of a catchphrase and a catch-all for some of the things that I'm focused on. But there's a little bit of debate around it. So femtech, the term femtech began as a more palatable way of explaining women-centered digital health to primarily men, because most of the venture capital firms that were funding startups were made up of rich white guys, basically. And there were all these women who were bringing these really cool tools that were focused on women's health to them to try to get funding. And the thing they kept getting back was, well, why does this matter? Or, oh, that doesn't, I'm not interested in that. Lots of people who didn't want to talk about menstruation or fund anything related to it. So this woman who started Blue, which some of you might be familiar with, an app, a period tracker app, coined this thing as femtech, so that when they went into venture capital meetings, they could say, look at this shiny femtech thing. But the counter to that is that there's a whole bunch of reasons. One, there's this idea of a pink tax. So a pink tax is when people charge more for things, the exact same thing, to try to market it to women. So a classic example is razors. If you go to a pharmacy and you've got two razors next to each other, one is blue and one is pink, the pink one will be more expensive for no reason. There was some critique that it was exclusionary, so it doesn't include anybody who does not identify as a woman, but also menstruates and also, is experiencing menopause or trying to get pregnant. It minimizes women to biological functions. So there's some critique that femtech tended to apply more to things related to reproduction, and wasn't including some of the other stuff that you guys pointed out as really important in digital health, like well-being, right? Women's well-being, that it's bigger than just reproduction. There was also the critique that women's issues should be everybody's issues, that we don't just need to narrow it down to this female lens, that, women are 50% of the population. And so any issue that women are facing is everybody's facing. We don't call it man tech when we try to launch a new, male-focused item. So there's a couple critiques there. The other big thing is there's a big decision recently in the States called Dobbs versus Jackson Supreme Court decision, and it undid the constitutional right to abortion and basically gave states a whole lot more flexibility in what they determined an illegal abortion to be. And part of that has been that some of this data that's being collected could now be used in courts to put women in jail if they had been deemed to be having an illegal abortion. And so some of this data also became very dangerous to people who might have it on their phones, and belong to platforms that might not be making, might not be taking it quite as seriously as they should in terms of privacy and security, which I'll dive into a little bit next. So there's this overall debate between, and I think you see this across almost everything digital, period. So I'm sure you guys, the classic example here is probably TikTok. And it's between this idea of empowerment and surveillance, which you have the empowerment that, say, TikTok provides. You can connect with your friends, you can post cool videos of dancing, you can get education. There's all sorts of fantastic things that internet platforms provide. Then there's also surveillance, right? You know that they're collecting data on you and working on your algorithm and selling that information to advertisers and lots of other groups of people in order to make money. And so you have this tension between, okay, how much good is this platform doing versus how much potential harm could this platform be doing? And in the area of fertility in particular, you see a lot of lack of privacy and security protections and enforcement. So not only are there kind of loose regulations, especially when it comes to what is considered a health versus wellness device or platform, there's also a big lack of enforcement. So reviews of some of the top apps have found that most of them do not actually abide by their own privacy rules, which is not allowed, but there's not a lot of enforcement bodies that actually come after them and say, hey, you can't have this in the App Store if you're selling data like this without telling people. There's been a couple of cases, but for the most part, it's really unenforced. On the flip side, so that we've got the surveillance concern. On the flip side, digital interventions provide access, right? While the cost of traditional care can remain out of reach for many people. And this is across healthcare in general. Healthcare can be expensive if you're in a country like the US, which I'm from. Healthcare can also take a long time to get sometimes if you're in the UK. And so digital interventions can provide instant access and a more affordable option for folks. So again, that's the sort of tension we're exploring here. So I'm curious to know, of folks online, do you worry about your privacy online? And if so, how frequently would you say you worry about it? So this is when you're using your phone, when you're on your laptop. I'm especially curious for things like if you're on, say, TikTok or Instagram. Do you worry about your privacy and what you're sharing when you're on those apps or not?
And again, this is open as a poll on Slido. I'll just pop across to that screen. Interesting.
Ooh, sometimes. Frequently, rarely. It looks like 50% of people, at least sometimes, are thinking about it. Rarely, okay. Ooh, rarely's coming up. Interesting. Okay, so here's where this becomes interesting in my opinion. So diving into fertility specifically. Fertility is kind of an interesting use case for exploring this tension that I talked about between surveillance and empowerment. And it's interesting because on one hand, infertility is really common, lots of people experience it, but it's still really stigmatized. And there's big socioeconomic differences in who actually goes out and gets care and who's actually able to conceive. And it requires a lot of work to manage. So you have to take frequent and consistent monitoring of your body in order to help you make choices around your fertility and conception. And that can be a big burden on patients. It's daily. You have to track it really carefully. You have to make sure you're taking them correctly. Most of them are taken at home on your own time. And it can take a real emotional and psychological toll. Patients report experiencing a lot of isolation, guilt, frustration, sadness, uncertainty, really tough emotions. And interestingly, digital health in this space has come in, for one, because it has a much lower price point than traditional treatment. So here in the UK, you can get IVF paid for in some instances, but not all. And there's often a wait time that people don't want to have to wait because your fertility decreases as you age. And so if you go through the private market, it costs thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. It's not accessible for many people. Digital health is also a lot more convenient than clinical care. So if you're working 3 jobs, you got 2 kids already, you're balancing lots of things. You might not have time to take off work and go into the clinic over and over again. So you might turn to one of these digital platforms first to see how successful you might be there. And then lastly, I mentioned, there's big socioeconomic differences in those who successfully conceive. And there's lots of patients who experience stigma. They might be uncomfortable with traditional office environments. They might be someone who traditional fertility care is not necessarily marketed or targeted towards. So, for example, if you're a queer person, it can feel like you're entering a very heteronormative space that might not be built for you. And so some patients also prefer that sort of anonymous and online persona of being able to come at it on their own time. And we know that of the patients that report experiencing infertility, 50% of them never go and receive clinical professional help. So a lot of people are doing what you guys talked about doing. They're on their phones, they're Googling, they're downloading apps to try to figure it out themselves first. So the area of fertility, the other kind of interesting thing to me, so we've talked about how it's a good use case for that tension. It's also nice because I'm someone who likes to bounce around lots of things. And a lot of people think about a DPhil and they think about somebody focusing on something really, really niche. And there are lots of examples of that. Okay. I have a friend who's studying what kind of grass sheep ate in the medieval ages. There are some people who really go down. Okay. They really focus. But I really wanted to study something where I could sort of explore lots of different areas, learn lots of different things. And so I settled on digital health and fertility specifically because it's kind of this nexus of lots of different fields. So I bounce into medical sociology some weeks I'm really into gender studies. Other times I'm really focused on that primary healthcare and kind of systems thinking. Other times I'm working on health policy. Other times I'm science and technology studies. So it's nice because a lot of my lectures and discussions with my supervisors and presentations kind of flex a lot week to week. And I'm kind of always staying curious, which is really nice. So what is the overall aim and objectives of my research? So we talked about some of the background, some of building up, overall kind of subject area. What I'm looking to do is specifically investigate how digital health interventions are impacting traditional care pathways and patient behavior and attitudes in the area of infertility. So we talked about how there's all these people that are using these tools. We really don't know that much about it. We know people are doing it, but we don't really know that much about it. We don't know how it's changing people's perceptions of infertility care, how it's changing their behaviors and attitudes in that space. We don't know a whole lot about how some of the most recent abortion restrictions in the United States is changing the use of these applications, whether people might feel more nervous about using them than they used to, and therefore kind of backing off using them. How people are weighing the benefits and risks, again, kind of in this post-Roe landscape. And again, how these interventions are replacing traditional care. And there's a couple of reasons why that's important to understand. So first of all, fertility care is a big component of reproductive justice, right? And so if these apps are more affordable, they're more accessible, and they're widely available to groups who are otherwise stigmatized, unable to afford traditional care, we should be promoting this more, right? We should be telling people these are more available. We should be helping people find them. If there's more affordable care that people can have at home, that's a really good thing, and we should be advertising that and helping people find those resources. But it's also a case where that tension between empowerment and surveillance is really evident, right? So of the top 10 apps, 62% of them immediately sell your data to Facebook as you enter it. And again, not only is that pretty sensitive data, it's personal data, it's also potentially dangerous data, right? If you're in a country like the United States. And so we have to figure out that balance and say, okay, but taking a step back, yes, they're accessible. Yes, they're easy to use. Yes, they have super pretty interfaces that make you want to stay on them all the time. But what's the potential downsides to these? And are patients fully aware if they really, really want access to these and they don't have the money to go to more traditional pathways? Are patients fully aware of what kind of data they might be entering and what they might be providing? So, and that kind of goes across healthcare in general as we're moving more towards this digitization of the health space. And as more and more countries, including the UK and US, embrace that. The other thing is, if patients are increasingly looking to get care through these alternate pathways, we have to understand how it's changing their attitudes and behaviors. So, traditional care pathways in the NHS are really carefully thought through. They're evidence-based. Tons of doctors meet and try to decide, scientists and policymakers, they all come together to determine some of these best care pathways that have the best chances of success and best outcomes. A lot of the apps don't necessarily do that, right? It's a much shorter pathway to getting out there and a lot less review. Sometimes there's no evidence at all. So if people are using these to make healthcare decisions, we also need to know that and understand what kind of influence that's having on people, positive or negative. And then lastly, just if the risk of using some of these more affordable health products increases in countries like the US, again, because of all these reasons that we've talked about, it's worth knowing if this is reducing kind of accessibility and influence of patient comfort. If it's changing how comfortable patients feel sharing information with their providers, sharing information, if it's making them more sort of struggle more on how they're going to make decisions around this because they no longer have that tool that they were really using and relying on to help manage their care, that's a big red flag, not just for the digital health industry overall, but it's a red flag that to us that says, okay, then we need to make some decisions here around privacy and security to make sure that people feel comfortable using these because they have a big role. And so what am I planning to kind of provide as part of this? So publications, that's the cornerstone of a PhD, to improve awareness and education, some policy guidance, especially in the area of privacy and security, guidance for patients and providers, and suggestions for industry and developers. That's sort of the big output goals. Okay, so now I have a question. So I've given you guys the pitch, all right? Need your honest opinion. Is Kate nuts for leaving her perfectly good job to do this PhD idea? This is what we call.
I'm looking forward to the response on this one, Kate.
This is what we call
I'll just switch
public
screens in a
feedback.
moment. Yeah, I'll just switch screens in a moment. I just also worth pointing out that I had a couple of questions through, which is brilliant.
Oh,
and we've got those in the tab. I'll do some Q&A with Kate to follow. So if you have any questions, stick them in the Q&A tab. That'll be great, and I shall chair them and put them to Kate. Here we go. So, oh, that's very
85%. This sounds interesting. You guys are being really nice to me. That's very kind. 14%. Who are you kidding? She was crazy before this too. Also accurate. Very accurate. So both great answers, I think. Fabulous. Well, let me get back to sharing here. So this is where I am. So, oh, sorry. So the next thing I want to talk about. So, and the reason I did that poll really quickly was just to get a sense, because why is this worth it? Why is it worth spending 3 years of my life on this subject when I could just be working a 9 to 5 and getting a lot more sleep and less stress than I have now? And this is my pitch for a PhD. So first, you get to spend 3 years doing exactly what you'd like to do. So again, whatever niche topic. I know someone who's studying leather bookbinding. You know, any sort of niche topic that you're interested in, there's probably an academic field out there full of people who will encourage you in it and connect you with all the right resources and want to talk your head off about it. So that's a pretty magical thing, to get to choose the one topic in the world that makes you most kind of curious and kind of sparks that light in you, and get to really dig down into it. Second, you're your own boss. You make your own schedule. This is fantastic. So, you know, if your working hours are 3 a.m. to midnight, and that's when you're most productive, fantastic. I don't recommend that. I don't do that. But I guess my point is, you make your own schedule. You get to prioritize the kinds of events that you want to go to, meetings with people that you want to meet with. And the more you put in, the more you get out. So the harder I work at my dissertation and my ideas and my research, the more I really see back from it, which is a pretty cool and powerful thing. I also get to build lots of new skills, which is fantastic. So if I say to myself, you know what, I've been talking a lot about machine learning, but I don't really understand machine learning. Bam, I've got a course in machine learning in 2 weeks to figure out the basics, you know, and I can also explore new creative outlets. So when I say to myself, you know, how am I gonna entertain people on a Trinity Access talk for 30 minutes about digital health and fertility? I could say to myself, all right, I need to figure out some good graphics for this. How do I do infographics? How do I get get some animations involved? So I get to figure out new creative ways to kind of express my interests and express some of those academic ideas. You also get to meet lots of fascinating people from all sorts of disciplines, like I said, you know, and, you know, the guy who studies what kind of grass that sheep ate, actually, it's super important. The more I talk to him, turns out it like decided a whole bunch of the geography of the UK. So you have conversations with these people where you think to yourself, there's no way these weird academics are going to be down to earth and pretty cool. And then you have a conversation with them and they really are, and they have a great point. And lastly, it's your opportunity to contribute your voice both to academia and to policy and to publishing and everything beyond. So if you've ever been in a classroom and, you know, you're looking through your textbook and you're kind of like, man, nobody in this textbook looks like me, or, you know, you're reading a paper and you're like, how could they have left out this really critical thing? They just clearly didn't appreciate this lens. This is kind of your opportunity to change that and to put your voice out. And I know in my department, there's been a lot of work around that, especially around patient empowerment, where, for a long time, people who'd only ever worked in the clinical side of things published all the research and made all the decisions around how patients felt about certain things. And that's really starting to change, in part because more and more and more patient advocates are getting involved in research and saying, hey, we need to be pulling patient voices into this and patient views into this. They're part of this too. We can't just be doing research, for and to the public. We need to be doing research with the public. And that's an idea that really only changed because people started saying, hey, I need to get my voice more involved in this. So yeah, I think, pursuing a PhD, pursuing academia is an opportunity to do that. So I am currently in year 1, so I'm super, super early, but this is what year 1 of your PhD looks like. So the beginning is lots and lots of research. I do something called patient and public involvement, which is really cool. It's when you get to, you get some special funding where you get to bring a bunch of patients into a room and you give them your research idea and they grill you. And they're like, this part's really dumb. This part's fantastic. I love this. I hate this. And you get to take all of that feedback and say, okay, am what I plan to do for the next 2 years, super deep research, all my publishing, all this stuff, what kind of impact is this going to make? And is this making the impact to stakeholders and patients that it needs to make? And if not, how do I change that now before I get started to make sure that I don't spend 3 years of my life on something that is worthless? Always good to double check. You'd be surprised. Stakeholder engagement, lots of that, lots of skills courses. So as I mentioned, I'm taking, a machine learning course in 2 weeks. I've been doing a qualitative methods course, which has been very interesting, all sorts of bits and pieces, health economics, all sorts of things. And then you do IRBs, which are independent review boards. That's basically getting your ethics approval for your research, finalize all the last details of your research. And then at the end of your first year, you have something called transfer of status, which is when you become an official PhD student. So the university is like, you're kind of an in-between PhD student right now. But then once you pass that first year, they're like, okay, your work looks fine. We'll let you in full time. And you can kick off the rest of your research, which is very exciting. Fabulous. Well, that wraps up my presentation. Hopefully I covered lots of things in a short time, but I would love to hear some of the questions and happy to chat more about how I got here and yeah, all of my research in general.
Okay, that's fantastic. It's so fascinating, and the questions reflect that fascination, and also you just touched on it. Quite a few honing in on your sort of way, how you've come to be doing what you're doing now, really. So I'm going to attempt to approach them in a sort of thematic way, but would warmly encourage any further questions as well. Send them in that Q&A tab there, and I'll see them here. So I suppose a chronological approach might be a good one. Which degree did you do first, and what paths of study did that involve?
Yeah, great question. So my very first, I didn't get a degree in the beginning. I got my emergency medical technician basic certification. So that's what allowed me to work on ambulances in the States. And then after I had done that, I first got my undergrad degree. So and this is what I mean by I really bounced. So I started working on ambulances with the certification. Again, liked it, but it was a little bit too like one-on-one, a little bit too like I felt like I wanted to make a bigger change patients that I was seeing. So I jumped into policy because I was like, that's large scale. I can affect thousands. This is what I want to do. So I did my undergraduate degree. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just go back a stage?
Yes.
Please hold that thought. I don't want to interrupt in that sense or stop that train of thought. But were you literally working in emergency ambulances and full on, as in resuscitation, everything that involves?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So EMTB in the States, you can't give like opiates, you can't do intubations. There's some limitations. So you can't do, it's like sort of an in-between step to paramedics. So paramedics up here, there's another level below EMTB. I think it's like EMTC or something where you can do even less. But I could still give certain, EpiPens, lots of the basic meds. Yeah, plenty of resuscitation, all the exciting things. So I finished that certification when I was 18. So I was still in high school. In the States, we called high school. I think you guys have called college here. So I was going to college and then on the weekends, finishing my certifications for EMT, which was exciting. But yeah, then I jumped and I went to, I did my undergraduate degree in health policy and administration because I was like, this is my chance. And then I got into health policy administration, and I was like, this is really slow. I really liked it. I liked some of the technical stuff, but I really missed the day-to-day of feeling like I was impacting people every day when I went home. So when I was on the back of the ambulance, when I walked out, I was like, I changed dozens of people's lives today, right? You have that sensation every day, and you have this feeling of like, nice. And with policy, it's a little bit more like writing based. It takes a long time. You're thinking really hard, and you do affect thousands, and it's very important. But it's a slow moving ball. And so I was like, man, I wish I could both make impact and still talk to people. And I ended up in software development because that's kind of what I was doing. So I worked in a really unique kind of development area where I was working for a nonprofit. We were funded entirely through grants, things like that. So working on very small amounts of money. But we were also offering the thing for free, the tools that we were building for free. And our goal was to bridge the digital divide. So go into communities that otherwise don't have access to a lot of fantastic technology, are still doing things with pens and paper, and try to automate as much of that as possible, as easily as possible. So we started off with COVID, developed this free to use tool using the CDC grant. Everybody owned their own data. We ran it. It monitored over 8 million people with a really small team. And it was this really nice thing where every single week I did a lot of our testing and user requirements. And so I worked really closely with public health departments who were like, hey, can you do this? And then I got to go back to our developers and be like, what do you think about this? And then I got to roll it out, and help roll it out to people on the ground who got to use it. So I was still impacting on this big scale. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people, but I was still getting to talk to all these funky people and hear what they needed, and had that sort of feeling of changing individual lives too.
Brilliant. You can't actually see this slide though, because just to make it easier, I'm putting the questions to Kay so she could focus on the presentation. But one of the questions is actually, how did you come to be interested in this path of study, which you've just perfectly, this whole sort of journey. I mean, we were talking about a learning journey, super curricular. Mm-hmm. This is a real kind of like professional learning journey here, isn't it? And interesting how you probably couldn't be more at extremes of, emergency situations. This is the impact of my action right now in an emergency situation. And then on the other hand, the other extreme, long-term policy, like, okay, I really need to be imaginative to see see what impact I'm having, because I'm writing things and can't necessarily see on the ground. There's two extremes there, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then also somebody's asked in a really simple one, which was, where, I can't see it now, but where did you do your undergraduate degree?
Yeah, great question. I did my undergraduate degree at George Mason University, which was my local university. It's a state university in the state of Virginia in the USA.
Right. So roughly near Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, pretty close to Washington,
roughly.
D.C. Technically on a metro line, barely.
Right,
it's a very long metro line. It's more in the suburbs.
So presumably kind of quite a bit of exposure as well to an extraordinary place, Washington. Obviously, it's not a normal place, isn't it? The capital in both sense of that word. And yeah.
So plenty of also views into all the politics that go on behind policy, which is the other thing that sort of threw me off of it, I think. But also a lesson in that if you start off interested in something and you think to yourself halfway through, I don't know about this, you can use lots of different degrees to do lots of different careers. And in a weird way too, like I wouldn't have made any of my next steps without doing the last step. So all of it was really valuable and beneficial, and all of it kind of brought me into interesting areas. Yeah.
Everything sort of becomes relevant, doesn't it? How do people get funding? This is another really good question. How do people get funding to do a PhD?
Yes, because I am only here because Oxford very kindly funded me wonderfully. So I was considered for funding. So I went through my application and all that kind of stuff without funding initially. Some people come in with funding specifically. So some PhDs come in and they apply to a funding body. So like Rolls-Royce, for example, will fund your engineering PhD. So you apply to their specific funding opportunity, and then you compete. And then if you win it, then you complete a specific piece of work for Rolls-Royce. So those are like company-based funding opportunities. The university also sponsors lots and lots of people. So I was lucky enough to get a university scholarship called the Clarendon Scholarship, which is available to all postgraduates in Oxford. When you apply, you're automatically considered. And I was also provided with a George Whitehead scholarship from Trinity College. So I really owe Trinity as well. Trinity was wonderful. So they also fund a lot of my PhD through the Whitehead Scholarship, which was named after George Whitehead, who was a Trinity member who lost both of his sons in World War I. And then I have a little bit of funding as well through a studentship through my department, which is kind of like an extra little cap to help with living expenses and things like that. So I have sort of 3 different funding bodies. I didn't apply specifically for any of them, but I was allocated them after I got into my department, basically.
What a lovely way to set up a memorial for somebody. You know, more than 100 years later, we're still students are still studying these important areas because of that funding. Interesting. There's another one, really beautifully simple. What is your day-to-day life like?
Ooh, great question. I kick off most days. I swim in the Thames. I don't live in London. Make that clear. It's in Oxford. It's approved for swimming. We're further outside the city. I start off with a cold water swim with the Trinity College Cold Water Swimming Society. And then I spend lots of time in the library usually, working right now on a lot of my patient and public involvement work and a lot of my background research, writing up a lot of my background section and some of the early parts of my dissertation. So my theoretical base, all of that good stuff. And a lot of it is capturing decisions that you're making. So when you're running your own research project, there's a lot of time making choices. And you have to capture those and justify those, because in 3 years, when I do my viva, which is when you put your final dissertation in front of somebody and they grade whether you pass or not, they have lots of questions around why you made the choices that you made. So right now is a lot of sort of setting up all the choices and justifying them all along the way so that I have a record of why I'm doing what. I have lunch at Trinity, which is delicious. Trinity is well known in Oxford for having fabulous lunches. It's so cheap, and they just give you like a huge plate of amazing foods, a huge menu every day. And then I do lots of MCR activities. So one of the cool things about being a postgrad at Trinity is we are super active, we're super social. Some people have an MCR is just like the entire postgraduate community. So master's degree students and PhD students who are all at Trinity. And we have a relatively small MCR, but we're very close knit, we're very friendly, not competitive at all. So like tonight I have pizza night. There's free pizza and wine and juice and water and whatever you want. Tomorrow we're doing a painting thing where we're painting little plant pots and we get a little mini plant to go with it. There's socials all the time, which is really nice. And I'm friends with lots of people in the MCR, so it's like a really nice way when I finish my day at the library to like relax and do something fun, usually with free food, which doesn't hurt. Yeah, and then there's all sorts of things. So I'm part of the Femtech Society as well here in Oxford, so I'll go to that in the evenings often. There's cool lectures and other types of informational sessions. Yeah, I would say that's sort of my typical day overall. Oh, and there's formals. Trinity formals are fantastic too. Also very cheap and also very delicious, which is like a nice 3 or 4 course dinner.
There's definitely a food theme going on here, isn't there? Sounds great. Sounds great. Our ambassadors normally need about half a second to start talking about food when they're talking about life at Oxford or Trinity. Okay, this is interesting. This questioner says, this might come up before the end, but what would you recommend in terms of digital healthcare, including femtech? I'm guessing, is that in terms of applications of it you've seen that work well, or it might be maybe things to read or look at, perhaps. If the person who asked that question wants to further clarify, or we can leave it how I've just left it, that would be great. But yeah, in terms of anything that you would particularly recommend in terms of things you've seen, or indeed resources that a student could look at, say she was in year 12, 17.
Yeah, I'd say if you're kind of interested and you're like, I want to figure out more about this area, and I don't know that much about it. One thing that I would really recommend, there's a Femtech newsletter, and I'm trying to remember if I can, let me like see super quickly if I can get the exact name, but it's free to sign up and they send you cool information all the time. Yeah, Femtech Insider is the name. And I'd really recommend that because it's a nice mix if you're kind of interested in hearing more about it, seeing what this full span of technology beneath it is, what's going on. Some of it is like business related. So if you're like, this is a cool idea, I wonder what would it look like to like work at a femtech company or do a startup with a femtech idea. It covers a lot of like, okay, what's the newest, where's the latest funding going? And like, what's the business outlook on this? And what are people thinking? But it also covers a whole bunch of academic work. So it'll show, work related to success rates or download rates or some of the big issues that are going on. And it has just some interesting information generally about the field and how it's expanding. Like I mentioned, like there's been some critiques that it's too focused on reproduction. Femtech Insider is very focused on including other types of like well-being platforms that are now being launched, again, primarily targeting women. So I would say that's like a really good place to get started if you're interested in it, because it's like your first step in and a nice big overview.
Brilliant. Thank you. Really nicely specific as well in terms of just taking people into a really specific field with that. That's great. I'll finish with two quick ones. Wow, this question could be asked about degrees generally, first degrees, not just PhDs, I would say. Is a PhD a situation where you could always do more work, you could read more, talk to more people? And if so, I think the questioner probably thinks it is. If so, how do you switch off?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's also one of those things. I feel like people who work at home have the same problem because it's like, well, your laptop's always in front of you. How do you tell yourself to stop answering emails? Yeah, part of it is joining specific societies. So like my cold water swimming society keeps me a little bit accountable, kicks off my day in nature, relaxed. I also have, I've been, one of my goals for my PhD, before I started the PhD, I sat down and thought to myself, what are some things I don't want to give up about myself? And I think this is a good thing generally, like if you're going into a challenging situation, period. There's this concept of, it's like the tornado of doom or something. It's got this like super terrible name, but it looks like a tornado. And the idea is that there's lots of things that add to your life. And if you think about it all in kind of this big cloud that you can't see, sometimes people get into this the tornado of doom, which is all the things that you like and that bring you happiness, you end up removing as soon as you hit stress points, because that thing seems like the most disposable, because it's not like, oh my gosh, this deadline, or like, oh my gosh, this application. It doesn't seem critical. And the more that you pick out that doesn't improve your day to day, the farther down the spiral you go, because now you don't have anything bringing you excitement or joy anymore. You just have the things that are exhausting and all your deadlines and all these things. And the whole argument is you've got to make sure that you stay in the big cloud of all the balance of things, both the things that are hard work, which you're going to have to do, and the things that bring you joy and replenish that energy when that hard work sucks it away. And what you don't want to do is end up in that tornado of doom, because you end up just feeling like totally lethargic and like you don't have purpose and all these things. Anyway, and I say all that because before I started the DPhil, I knew that lots of people, I didn't want to become the DPhil who, you're at a dinner with your friends and they can only talk about leather bookbinding, no matter what, like everything you say comes back to leather bookbinding. I mean, like there's some academics you meet that are like that. And I thought it was really important to stay with a foot in the real world. Oxford can be a little bit of a bubble. And so having those two things in my head is a reminder that if I take time to read for fun, if I take time to do art, if I take time to listen to music, it's not a waste of time, that it's just as important as what I'm doing, because it lets me continue to do what I'm doing without burning out. And it lets me to also continue to like have my fantastic friendships and keep my family close without irritating them too much about digital health. So I think also just like setting that up ahead of time for yourself and keeping that in your mind helps to then prepare you for when you inevitably reach that moment when you're like, no, I can't have fun. I have to do all this stuff.
Wise and also for me reassuring words there, definitely. And to conclude, I love questions that start with something like this. As a start, I hope this isn't too off topic. I don't think we could have too off topic. But do you think TikTok will be getting banned by more governments around the world? I think this is probably in response to the Canadian government this week that's been looking at TikTok closely.
And the US pretty closely. Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. I don't know. I think the US is certainly very interested in trying to ban it. So the US has already banned it off of, if you're like a US government employee, you are not allowed to have it on your phone, because they suspect there's so much data being recorded. They're concerned about state secrets. But whether that'll apply more broadly, I mean, I definitely foresee stronger restrictions coming through, both in the UK and US. You've been seeing a lot more interest in the UK too around safeguarding for teenagers and kids. A lot of that has to do with how Facebook, Instagram, TikTok appeal to children through their marketing and lots of different things. So I suspect we won't see a full ban, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some pretty substantial restrictions put in before too long. But I think it's going to the courts. I suspect that'll get escalated. So it's going to be an interesting battle. That's something that's worth staying tuned on.
Yeah, a really interesting area, won't it be? Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for your enthusiasm this evening and for taking us really sort of deeply into quite a different world, a world that impacts on all of us. And yeah, it's been really fascinating. You've really sort of taken us both into the detail, but you've also given us some really sort of great insights into what your working life's like. And I'm pretty sure I can probably speak for all in saying that you've really given us some pretty infectious enthusiasm this evening. So thank you very much. And thank you to our attendees as well for joining us this evening, and to all those who are registered who may see this subsequently as well. Kate, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, just want to say thank you all. Thank you for being such wonderful participants. It was super fun to see all your poll responses. And thank you, Richard, for having me. Always thrilled to get to talk about my research.
Thank you. Cheerio.